and I have contempt for this order, and I will not follow it. So really, you think about it, Judge, I'm in maximum contempt of court, and you should put me in jail for the maximum sentence for criminal contempt, because I'm never following this order. And I've told her, I said, what'll happen is, the day you put me in the Lou Sterrett jail in Dallas County, I'm going to go to the law library, and I'm going to file a writ of habeas corpus. Here it is. I showed it to her. And I said, then I will go in handcuffs up to the Fifth Appeals Court. You'll come in your judge's robe, and we'll just see who's right. That'll be 4 days later. And she wouldn't do that because she knew she would lose. She'd be overturned, and something even worse could happen. So instead what she did was she took my children away from me on July 31st. Here's her reasoning. The illegal order, the gag order, was entered in the interests of your children. You are not following the illegal order. Therefore, you are not acting in the interests of your children. And therefore, you can't see your children anymore. That's the actual argument in the memorandum order. So it's been 9 months, and I've been unsuccessful in getting a final order from her so that I can go up on mandamus, but we're working. So it's highly legal, me talking to you, and screw my judge, I'm going to do it. Basically because since COVID, I've just decided that I just don't follow illegal orders or mandates from the government anymore, and I'm just not going to do it. And I've realized that there's lots worse things than jail. You know, I think about what would be jail for me. Near infinite leisure, 3 hots in a cot, plenty of time to finish the 2 books I'm working on. I mean, I don't really think it would be that bad. And I would rather do that than have these bastards take my rights. And I'm just not going to do it anymore. And I encourage you to do the same. Don't let these bastards take your rights. So I got a call from the New York Times. And I think it's interesting. When I told the reporter that this was my basic issue, that the state of Texas tried to sexually abuse and murder my son. You know, I've had some people say, well, that's a bit of hyperbole. Did they really try to murder your son? Well, you know, the suicide rate after these treatments is about 24 times higher. So, yeah, I think they did. And I don't think I'm exaggerating. I talked to this New York Times reporter, and it was a really excellent example of how the left approaches these political issues. You know, he asked me questions like, well, what's going to happen when your son turns out to be gay? Or what if your son, you know, grows up to be transgender? And I kept telling him, look, you belong to a leftist piece of trash media, and I don't do interviews with a leftist piece of trash media. I just don't do it, you know? And he said, why do you think it's a leftist piece of trash media? I said, gee, I don't know. You paralyzed United States foreign policy for 4 straight years with a fake Trump dossier that you knew was fake? I said, I don't know. You know, you did enormous damage to this country. You pissed off people with lies so bad they burned our cities down. So I don't do interviews with piece of trash newspapers. I said, and he said, well, what could I do to get you to do an interview with me? And I said, repent. And he said, but I'm Jewish. We don't have this concept of repentance. And I said, bullshit. All the Abrahamic religions have a concept of repentance. It's almost all the same. And he went, yeah, you're right. He said, well, what would I repent of? I said, quit your job and go work for Fox News and be a real journalist. Then I'd do an interview with you. That's what it would take. Right? But the hubris of the guy, that like he sort of is he by default is the status quo, just because he's some pissant reporter at a leftist rag in New York City. These are my boys, James and Jude, named after the brothers of Jesus. That's James, that's Jude. Jude's a chess genius. He's a genius at all games. James is a very talented boxer. Olympic talent coaches have already come out to see him. They were talking about giving him a tutor and letting him box full time and have a tutor just teaching his lessons. He's super skilled. I'll never forget the first time that he was taught a jab. His boxing coach was like, "You worked with this sport before?" No, it's like, this is the first time. He's like, he said, "James, throw 100 jabs. I'm gonna cut all the ones that are right." He's like, 99. It's natural, real natural, fluid, relaxed boxer. Super fast footwork and incredible endurance, right? Jude has a little bit of cerebral palsy, and boxing has helped him because you cross the body. A proper punch in boxing, you cross the center line, to protect yourself. That cross-body thing really helped him, and he's coming into his own. They're good kids, man. Really good kids. And with me, and here's the critical thing, my son has always presented as a boy with me. He only presents as a girl with his mom. Why would the courts give him to her? Think about it. It makes no sense. They're privileging this abnormal gender expression. This is Jude finally figured out his how to do a circuit. He kind of got some of you who are engineers, he kind of got the water pressure analogy for voltage, and kind of figured out how to do a circuit on his own without my help. He was pretty excited. And just to let you know what kind of relationship they have, James for days after was gushing how proud he was of his brother for figuring this out. James likes to hunt, so he doesn't. I grew up around this area. And James really did not believe many of the stories when I was growing up. So I grew up really poor. And I actually had to hunt for food. Like, I actually had to bring in food. I was responsible twice a week. I had to bring food. So, before I was old enough to shoot, I made an Apache throwing stick that my uncle showed me how to make. And I used to catch rabbits. And, I bring home 3 or 4 rabbits for the pot, twice a week. James was like, what? So I got hunting boomerangs from Australia, and then where I live in the city, there's no season on rabbits. So, we can get rabbits anywhere. And since we're not shooting a gun, we can do it anywhere, public parks, anywhere. So we're out in public parks scaring all the soccer moms, taking out rabbits. And that was him after he got his first rabbit out by the creek. He figured out that if he cornered them in the water, that they move back and forth in a predictable way. You can slam them. And this is me getting in his first suit. I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I wear a suit to church, and he really wanted to be a man and join me, in a suit. He was super proud that day. This is what she did to him. So this is him, just about 4 years old. Yeah, until you see a picture, you don't understand what I'm talking about. Okay. Let me tell you how this came about, this change. We were in court. I've been in court continuously. I'm a jailhouse lawyer. I have more litigation experience than my attorneys. Okay, because I've been in court almost every week for almost 9 years. So she kept telling me that he only presented as a girl with her. And she told the judge that, and she testified to that. So I produced this picture from her business website of him as a boy. And I also had video of me taking him back to her, and he walks in as a boy, no problem. He's comfortable. He comes out in boy's clothes from her house when I pick him up. So he's comfortable as a boy with her, but he's not comfortable as a girl with me. Okay? All right, you're starting to see this picture I'm trying to address. So the very next day, against court orders, because we were enjoined from modifying any of the electronic record, she changed them on an international public-facing website. And that was when I decided that I would violate the gag order. If she went public, I'll go public. But this is what we're talking about doing to my son. So here's just some facts. She's a pediatrician in Coppell, Texas. She's referred, to my knowledge, 3 other children to gender clinics. She filed divorce specifically to transition my son. This was the real goal of her litigation. And she has steadfastly pursued it for 7 years now. Jennifer Pape, notice that I name names. I name people's names. You don't see a lot of that anymore. People talk, well, a pediatrician, or they say a doctor. Like, that's another thing we need to stop doing. We need to name people's names. If what we're saying is true, it's not defamatory. Okay? Dr. Jennifer Pape, a pediatrician in Flower Mound, improperly diagnosed my son with gender dysphoria. She diagnosed him with gender dysphoria, never speaking to me, the father.
Is that legal?
It's legal. There's some more things you're going to find out that are shocking. So it's perfectly legal for her to do that. She never talked to me to find out that he doesn't present consistently as a girl. He only presents as a girl with his mom. So the standards that the pediatricians follow are somewhat different than what the psychologists follow. They have this notion that it must be insistent, persistent, and consistent. Well, it's obviously not insistent. If he insists on being a boy at my home, right? It's just not an insistent thing. It certainly isn't consistent, right? And I had years where he was doing this, so it's certainly not persistent. It doesn't persist, right? So she totally misdiagnosed him. Once my ex-wife had that diagnosis from the pediatrician, the misdiagnosis, it went to Rebecca Ower, who's a married lesbian psychologist at Rainbow Counseling. It won't surprise you. And she referred my son to the Genesis Clinic for what, this is in the medical records, the medical side of treatments. Now, Jennifer Pape said that they wanted to put my son on puberty blockers starting at 9, which is how old he is now. All right. So this is the stated aim in the medical records, was to chemically castrate my son. It's in the records. This isn't my opinion. This is what they wanted to do. And this is what she asked for in court. It's a little bit hard to read, but she's big about not letting me cut his hair because she wants to get him in front of a jury looking like a girl. I think the one that offended me the most, obviously this is just taking away all my parental rights, but look at number 5. Educational classes and counseling. I think you know where I'm going with this. Ordering father to attend counseling and or educational classes associated with being the parent of a transgender child or a potentially transgender child. Specifically, listen up, a class that educates father how his actions and non-affirming behavior could be harmful to the child's emotional well-being. Basically what this is saying is if the psychologist says that by not affirming my son as a girl that I'm causing harm to him, this would allow the court to remove my parental rights. That's what she asked for. The court, fortunately, did not grant number 5. They did something worse, which I'll get to. Now listen, this is the big thing. This is the thing that was never presented to the jury. The judge wouldn't let me. He never presents as a girl with me, only with his mom. At church, everywhere. So people talk about the 2019 trial and how, all these negative findings about me at the trial and all this stuff, but I won that trial. That's why it doesn't make any sense what they're saying. So I got 50-50 custody, no child support, and a veto on all the exercise of all parental rights. All of them. Okay? In order to get that, I needed to take a course of counseling which covers 9 points. These are things like unconditionally loving your child, recognizing the signs of bullying, understanding what the publicity in this case could mean for the child, things like this, right? So the court orders that I go to counseling. Then the court appoints a counselor who then appoints another counselor. So now I'm spending $500 an hour instead of $250 an hour, right? I spend $30,000 in 18 months, and they never once cover any of the 9 points in the court order. Meaning that I never got 50-50 custody, no child support, or a veto on the parental rights. You see how they use this? Okay. I want to introduce you to the people, the psychologists that did this to my son. The man smiling here is Dr. Benjamin Albritton. I caught him in a lie on the stand, 2 lies, because I recorded our meetings together. He perjured himself twice. And my experts showed that he did not understand the logical relationships of the criteria of the diagnosis of gender dysphoria. So we're among a bunch of engineers and so forth, so this will make sense to you. There are 2 criteria. In the diagnostic manual, there are criteria A and B. And you must have A and B. He interpreted it as having A or B. And he admits that my son doesn't have criteria B, therefore he cannot be gender dysphoric. He didn't understand. Still, he recommended that my son be transitioned to a girl. nevertheless. This is the custody evaluator in my case. His name is Blake Mitchell. He's an execrable man. Well, he was in the Navy. You can't, what are you going to do? I showed him the video. If you go out to YouTube and search for "Mommy Says I'm a Girl," you will see a video there of my son. It went viral all over the world. My son has just passed his 3rd birthday, telling me that mommy is teaching him that he's a girl. It's the first iPhone video ever time. This man asked me what my top 3 issues were in the divorce. My number 1 issue was Aunt Georgia was tampering with the gender identity of my son James. I showed him the video. Right? He issues an opinion in my original divorce. This is back in 2017. And says he found no evidence that she was tampering with his gender identity. That James is just a normal boy. And therefore, I made a false accusation against her. And on that basis, they gave me less than standard possession time with my son. Blake Mitchell. Okay. Now, you know all of the trouble that I've caused Governor Abbott, in the state. Governor Abbott did not want to deal with this issue. So remember, he didn't want to do anything. Everything he's done, I have forced him to do. So he didn't want to order the agencies to, make a determination whether this stuff is child abuse. So, I got 3 million people to call his office. And I made sure they were all soccer moms, which is the demographic he follows in his polling. So he starts doing polls and it's looking bad, so he has to do it. And I've done that to him 3 times. So the guy hates me for this. Okay? He hates me. So it comes time for Judge Bloody Mary Brown to appoint a psychologist. Remember I told you the psychologist appointed another one? The second one that was appointed is this woman right here, Dr. Susan Fletcher. She was appointed by Abbott to the Board of Examiners of Psychology. Do you remember the red flag laws? Remember that? The red flag commission? You know what I'm talking about? So they were trying to pass laws so that if a psychologist suspected that you might be unstable, they could remove your gun rights. She was the leader of that commission. Does anybody here think it was an accident that I got an Abbott appointee as the counselor in my case?
Nope.
Probably not. So this woman, what happened was in July, I got my son for 30 days, and she had refused to ever take appointments with my son, James, right here. She would not take appointments with him from my home because he comes as a boy. She would only take appointments when he came from Ann's house as a girl so that she could get in front of a jury and say, this kid always presents as a girl to me. See? But in July, I forced her to take 2 appointments. I set it up that way. And so my son goes in there and tells her 4 times that he wants to be a boy, wants to go to school as a boy, that he's getting embarrassed. She doesn't reply to him, doesn't react to him in any way. So he takes his Apple Watch in there the next time and records him telling her and records the conversation. And she has a conniption fit. She threw my sons out of the office. She initiated the 8th, remember I told you it was 8? The 8th CPS investigation against me. She wrote a report for the court saying that I was coercing my son, but she never said what I was coercing him to do. And she never mentioned in her report to the court that my son asked to be a boy. So I filed suit to get the psychology records. Here's what I found out. Parents in Texas do not have rights to their children's psychological or medical records. Think about that for a second. The doctor or psychologist or psychiatrist has a right of privacy privilege that they can exert for the child against the parents. And they're not obligated to tell you that they have exerted such a privilege. You have no rights to your children's medical or psychological records. So that's how the Capel School District transitioned my son at school without telling me for a year. What happened was the school counselor exerted that right of privilege and never told me. Based on that privilege, Dr. Fletcher refused to let me see her notes. Her treatment notes would undoubtedly show that James requested to be a boy. However, the rules of civil procedure, right? It's 5048D, give me the right to see those records in any case because they relate to matters in my pleadings. The judge still wouldn't let me see them, even though it's black letter civil procedure. And so after that report, Judge Bloody Mary Brown took my children. That's how I lost my kids. So you get the joke, Bloody Mary. Yeah. I refused to follow this order, and it was clearly, you can see that it's clearly targeted toward political topics. Like I cannot talk about LGBT issues, basically. I gave you her reasoning. So, my ex-wife has since been free to transition my son, and I think if you look at my son Jude's expression, that pretty much captures it all. Right? He's being feminized with hormones because she gives him lotions with estrogens in them. And she's a physician. She also gives him some other things, which I don't know. My son's told me about, but I don't know what's in them. But he's clearly been feminized. You can tell. You can basically tell. He uses the girls' restroom at school, and they're actually teaching him that he's a girl at school. This is something that the left has been able to accomplish, and I'm going to explain to you later how they do it, because they have a repeatable process for doing this. It's how they got gay marriage and other things. But they really are in institutionalizing child abuse, and they're doing it intentionally. They're doing it intentionally. And we'll talk about why. How do they do this? How do they institutionalize this madness, right? How does it work? Here's how it works. I call it science hacking. So it's very easy to do in things like psychology and humanities, okay? But you pick a social custom that you want to destroy. You get like-minded people that would also like to destroy it, preferably in the academic community, right? Preferably with a track record of publishing in other disciplines. Then you start an open source journal. And you get lots of scholarship contributed from multiple sources and multiple disciplines. So it looks interdisciplinary. Right on? Okay. You make sure that the scholarship is peer-reviewed by all of these like-minded scholars that you originally gathered together to destroy the social customs. So you peer-review it. You're only going to accept stuff that obviously recommends destroying the social custom. You develop what I call meta-theories, new interpretations of previous theories, right, that are plausible, logically plausible. They're empirically implausible, but are logically plausible. And then you reinterpret previous evidence using these meta-theories, right? After you've done this, you want to build a large body of scholarship, reinterpreting previous results. Large body, preferably, again, interdisciplinary, right? At that point, you've got enough to go to Elsevier or some of the other mainline journal contributors, and you convert it from an open source journal to a mainstream journal, right? Then you take this quote-unquote scholarship and you go into the professional bodies, the accounting bodies, the law schools, ethics panels, the American Psychological Association, American Academy of Pediatrics. And now you start to build professional rules around these new theories that reinterpret previous evidence. And that coerces everyone in the field to go along with you. So now you have a large body of scholarship, and you have actual clinical practices going along with what you're doing, right? and now you can go and change the law. And that's how they do it. Works every fucking time. Every time. Because our conservative guys, our top intelligentsia guys, they're sitting in free market think tanks, talking about, global free trade, and they don't look at this. They've not looked at our social issues in 50 years. They don't care about our social issues. There's no money from donors to look at this, right? So
free market donors are probably giving these people money.
They are, 100%. So there's a couple of things I like to say about this. One is, and I've testified to this in court many times, and it seems to have no effect on juries. Why did science come about? Precisely to remove authority as a final arbiter or judge of what's true. That's why science came about. There were philosophical authorities which said that, gravity had to work this way, the moon had to be a flat spot on a celestial sphere moving. That's what it had to be, right? Science came about to say, no, actually, we're not going to take philosophical theories anymore. We want physical theories that we can repeatedly test. Replication becomes the test of truth, right? Specifically, it came about to eliminate authority as a source of truth. What is peer review? Well, it was originally intended to make sure that scholars followed, procedures that were considered rigorous by the discipline, right? So when I submit a topology paper in topology, there's a whole set of standards that I'm expected to meet, right? We won't, for example, topology journals will not accept picture proofs, right? Most of my proofs are going to have to be algebraic, right? If not outright analytic. And for somebody like me, who's a strong finitist and I don't accept analytic proofs, it can make my life pretty difficult, right? But that's an example of some of these standards. Statistical standards, in engineering journals, there'll be specific statistical standards and the standards and conditions under which the experiments need to be performed. That's what peer review is supposed to be about. But today it's become a proxy. You'll say, well, I've got peer-reviewed research. Peer-reviewed research doesn't mean it's true. It means that we think the standards of the experiment met the standards of the field, but it may have never been replicated. Maybe somebody else did something with the exact same thing and was never able to replicate it. The mere fact that something's peer-reviewed means jack and shit when it comes to truth, okay? It means, well, you have a reasonable suggestion. We should look at it. Somebody else should try to replicate it. If it's replicated hundreds of times, okay, maybe we'll accept that, right? Maybe we'll do that. One of the problems in psychology is that their results don't replicate. Not just small results, like the top 10 results in psychology that they have built almost all their theories for prisons, military, schools. They've gone back and tried to replicate this stuff. None of them replicate. They have a replication rate that's around 50%, which is random. That is equivalent to flipping a coin. Okay, so it tells you that psychology is probably not a scientific discipline. Now, since this is all being done by professors, this science hacking is all done by professors in academia. What it tells us is that probably your professors are the least reliable people you will ever meet. Right? Essentially, what I'm arguing here is that you should go back to what Galileo said. You should go back to what Copernicus said. You shouldn't believe your professors. You should just go test it yourself. Screw your textbooks. In the 1960s, they said, go do drugs and screw everything. Well, I'm going to tell you to, screw your textbooks, go repeat their experiments. Don't believe them. And because we have this thing in conservatism that the left doesn't have, which is a tradition, ways of acting that have worked very well in the past, it turns out it's much more reliable, because what tradition actually is nothing more or less than something that's repeatedly worked. And in a social context, that's hard to control for. But if something's worked for hundreds of years, you probably need to have a very good reason to change it, right? Of course, something that's worked for hundreds of years is the best reason for the left to destroy it. So using these techniques, the left subverted the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual for Psychology. This is the book that determines if you have a psychological disorder. The way this happened is they actually had a transgender riot in Chicago at one of their meetings. People were actually injured, and under those conditions, they just changed the manual. Literally, that's what they did. So here's the thing. The DSM-5 isn't a thing where they go, look at all these experiments that replicated, so now we can come up with a decent definition, right? They don't do that. They have panels, and bureaucrats get elected to these panels. They're appointed in some cases, and then they take votes on things. It's done by democratic and bureaucratic processes, not scientific processes. So since it's not scientific, virtually nothing in the DSM-5 can actually be falsified. There's no way for me to prove, in principle even, that the definition of gender dysphoria is incorrect. There's just no way for me to do it, right? Because it isn't itself a scientific proposition, right? So what's happening is that this allows the psychologist to take social and political opinion and dress it up in science, but then they can go into courtrooms and testify as experts to this. And expert testimony has a different quality than mere opinion, right? This is the diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria. Look at 1 through 6. It basically says that if you engage in stereotypical behaviors of the other sex, you meet criteria A. So if you have a tomboy, what we used to call a tomboy in my day, she likes to play football, she would meet criteria A for sure, right? And then if you asked her, hey, if we dress you up in a dress and high heels and take you out to dinner, do you feel uncomfortable in a dress? Most tomboys would be like, yeah, I'd rather wear jeans and some combat boots, right? She would meet criteria B. So all those tomboys from my youth, they'd all have their breasts cut off today. They'd have been transitioned today by the psychology community. What's really strange about this is, I kind of grew up in a rural farming community right around here, 20 miles that way. Tomboys were considered the best wives once they grew up, right? Because they were usually physically fit, so they're pretty hot. And they could hunt, ride, and shoot with you, which most of the other women wouldn't do, So you get like a woman to keep the house, raise the babies, and she could hunt, ride, and shoot with you, go camping with you. They were highly sought after as wives, actually, where I come from. Right? But today they would have their breasts cut off and they'd be fully transitioned because they would meet both criteria, unquestionably. Now, I consider that a falsification from tradition. Okay? We have a long tradition of dealing with tomboys. Well, them grow up to be women. And almost all of them do. Right? This definition would put them down a terrible pathway where they wouldn't be able to have children, they'd be sterilized, they wouldn't be able to nurse children. A terrible path. I think of that as a falsification, but notice that it's not a scientific falsification. There's no way to scientifically falsify this. This is a stipulative definition like you might see in mathematics or law. It's not an empirical definition. And so you see this clever way that they've used the criteria to force professional bodies to change, and then they go into the courts as expert witnesses and make the courts do it. Because there's 3 kinds of law, right? You guys know there's 3 kinds of law. Right? You have statutory law, then you have judge-made law, which we call precedent. When these guys go in and testify and they win cases, it creates customary precedent in the courts, and that's binding on judges, just like statute. So it makes law. When they go in and testify, it makes law. So it's a big deal. I've never found a good way to explain this to a jury. If you ever figure out an easy way to do it, I'd love it, because when I say that they use stipulative definitions, the juries just don't know what I'm talking about, right? But, what I mean is look, in the law, if I define speeding as going over the speed limit, that makes speeding what it is. It's a speech act. In mathematics, if I define a point as something that meets three axioms, like in a neutral geometry, well, that's what a point is, right? You can't come back to me in mathematics and say, well, I think that makes no sense for a point. I think a point should also do this. Well, okay, that's true. Then you can create your own geometry, just add that in as an axiom, but that's not what I'm doing. You see how in math we're kind of like cowards, like we sidestep all these philosophically difficult problems, like, yeah, man, have at it. You got your point, I got my point, we're good, right? But by stating the definition, I make it so in mathematics, right? That is actually what psychology does. These definitions are stipulative. By simply stating the definition, they create the disorder. That's what it is. It's not based on anything empirical. It's amazing. They did the same thing to the insurance companies. A lot of people don't understand the ramifications of this, right? So, when Obamacare made insurance companies cover gender therapies, that meant that there was a lot of money for hospitals and psychologists to make by diagnosing people with these disorders. So shockingly, prior to Obamacare paying for this, there were almost no diagnosis of gender dysphoria anywhere in the world. But when European welfare states and American insurance companies were forced to start paying for this stuff, there's a giant explosion of it. Each child represents about a $4 million lifetime income stream, and they will forever be on the hook for hormones, right? So that's another $1 million income stream. So this is how they do it, man. Once they manufacture these pseudoscientific facts, and then they embed that and create a new class of victim and embed that in the law and embed that in the financial practices, then they got to make you pay for it. Right? That's how it works. And they don't want their side to pay for it. They don't want the left to pay for it. They want conservatives to pay for it. Middle-class Americans pay for this because they're the ones who predominantly pay the highest relative rates for insurance. Okay? So that's another thing the left always does. They'll subvert the facts, subvert professional bodies, subvert the law, and then make you pay for it. That's how they work every single time. Go back and look at how they got gay marriage. So many of you libertarians are probably saying, gay marriage is a dead question, let's not address gay marriage. But it's very instructive to look at how we got gay marriage. So people say, well, we should make better arguments as conservatives. Gay marriage proves that that's a totally dead-end idea. So gay marriage came up for a vote in 48 of the 50 states, and it was voted down in 48 of the 50 states. It was voted down twice in California, both times with a plurality of gay people voting against it. Nobody wanted gay marriage. Nobody in the United States wanted gay marriage. California did not want gay marriage. So how do we get it? The left went into a court in California and took it up to federal court. Then they went into a court in Georgia and wound up in a federal court, 2 different federal districts with 2 very different judge panels who understandably came to different conclusions. Now you have disagreement in the federal courts. Where does that go?
Supreme Court.
Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court imposed gay marriage on us. They literally overturned the will of 48 states who voted on it. California, who voted on it twice. It's very instructive to understand how the left works. They are playing at a different level in politics than you are. Okay, Republicans and conservatives are simply not even close. I admire our opponents, actually. Very much admire them and their use of political power. Right? I'll give you another example. Here in Texas, I was very curious why I was getting so much pushback on outlawing these procedures, because the polling shows that 95% of Republicans want to shut down these gender clinics, and about 60 to 70% of Democrats do. And it's the closest thing to unanimity in the state you're ever going to get. So why are they fighting us? So here's how it works. The left, when they built these multi-million-dollar, takes $30 million to build one of these things, right? They went into key Senate districts in the state, and they got local state banks on the hook for loans to those gender clinics. So what happens when Jeff Younger comes along and says, you got to close these things down? What's going to happen to those loans? The bank's going to eat those loans, right? So I think they knew that eventually they're going to have to pass my law and outlaw this stuff. They know eventually they're going to have to. But I think they wanted to delay it until the clinics could make financial arrangements so these local banks, these donor banks, are not hurt. Sure enough, I don't know, last year about this time, the Genesis Clinic where my son went was absorbed into Children's Hospital, who will now pay off those loans. You see how they're playing at a different level? Using big donor banks in key Senate districts in the state? All right. They win. They focus on winning. We're talking about principles all the time. We're talking about the non-aggression principle, man. We're talking about low taxes, right? And we're bringing Robert's Rules of Order, and we can out-debate them all the time. And, and what do they bring in? They're bringing crowbars and switchblades. We're bringing Robert's Rules of Order. Okay, you're going to lose every time like that. They know how to use political power, and we don't. Right? So why is it so hard to beat them? Why can't we muster the power? You're not going to like any of the answers I give you. The last one you're really not going to like. So, first of all, if I asked you who funds the transgender movement in the United States, what would you say? What would be your first thing? If you'd never seen this, what would you say? Democrats. Wrong. Republicans fund the transgender movement in the United States.
What donor?
This guy is the largest donor to the Republican Party. And he sues every son of a bitch that talks about it. He threatened to sue me. Largest donor to the Republican Party. Adelson used to be the largest donor, but Adelson's passed away. Now he's the largest donor. He's a hedge fund billionaire. You know what the Human Rights Campaign is? The equal sign? He's the largest donor of the Republican Party. He founded the Human Rights Campaign. He's the founder of the largest and most powerful transgender lobby group in the world. He's the reason the pride flags fly at every embassy in the world. Embarrassing this country. This is James Pritzker. He calls himself Jennifer Pritzker now. As you can see, he's an extraordinarily ugly man in dress. He funds the child transgender movement in the United States, and he's the third largest donor to the Republican Party. He is the brother of the governor of Ohio. The Republican donor class funds the LGBT movements. Now, for years, these people were washing their money through Australian NGOs and bringing it back into the country. That's why we didn't catch them for a long time. There was a wonderful piece written at the Federalist called "Who Are the Rich White Men Funding the Transgender Movement?" And they traced this money. This is pre-COVID. Traced this money through Australia and figured it out. So that's one thing. You have this big donor class in the Republican Party that is for the leftist social issues. So you have a war between the donor class and the voters. Okay? And Abbott's in the middle. Okay? So how does it work at the legislature? Let me tell you how this plays out at the legislature. This war between the donors and the grassroots. So your representative will introduce incredibly conservative legislation. Just solid-ass conservative legislation. Stuff that'll just make you beat your chest and say the Pledge of Allegiance, right? And then it never passes. So after about 4 or 5 legislative sessions, you get a little older, a little more jaded. You start wondering, why does it never pass? Well, the answer is your legislator is killing his own bills in committees. So why would he do that? Well, because you think he's awfully conservative and you're beating your chest and saying the national anthem every time you see him
For our
walk by.
representative, it's because the Waltons are giving you money.
Gotcha. Who is your representative?
It's Dustin Burrows.
So Burrows and I have a long history.
Yeah.
Burrows killed my bill on the calendar committee. Bill might be on the calendar.
Yeah, I went and looked at his donors after I saw him do that a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you'll say, wow, they're conservative, and you'll vote for them. And then the donors will give them money because they killed the bill. So they please both. That's what they're doing. And Dustin Burrows is the king of this. That's why they put him in charge of the calendar committee, because he is the king of killing bills. Every good conservative bill goes to die in the calendar committee at the hands of Dustin Burrows, who puts his short, little, stubby fingers around the neck of that legislation and kills it. And I can't wait to put my foot up his ass. Okay, answer number 2. You may not like this one either, because a lot of Texas legislators are libertarians, like Paul Singer. Paul Singer is a libertarian. He's a libertarian. And the problem with libertarians is that they don't believe, for example, that government can interfere in a personal family decision. That argument was deployed against me over and over and over at the legislature. It's a carefully crafted technique that the left uses so that they're trying to hold you to a conservative principle of non-government interference in family affairs, right? But it's not a conservative principle. That's a libertarian principle. That's a libertarian principle. Conservatives certainly do believe in interfering in family affairs when a fundamental liberty interest of a child is at stake. Right? Families don't have unlimited purview to do whatever they want with their kids. Right? So I would reply to this, but as a conservative, we don't want government interfering in these things. And I said, so what you're telling me is it's a conservative principle to allow families to castrate little boys. That's what you're telling me. And then we'd be all like, what? Like, you could see the cognitive dissonance in these normie conservatives who had been taught this libertarian thing from the leftists. Okay? And they're like, conservative principle, cutting little boys' balls off. You could just literally see it like, it's like an old Star Trek episode where the computer explodes from a logic puzzle or something, right? So the problem with libertarianism, I have problems with its ethics, I have problems with its epistemology, I have problems with its utopianism. But the main problem with it is that every time it's freaking deployed, it's functionally left-wing. Every single time. It just never gets deployed for conservative purposes. When has a libertarian, when has Reason Magazine stood up for something a conservative proposed?
No.
Never. They never do. They're always trying to explain some nuance for why we have to kind of go along with the leftist approach. Right? It's functionally left-wing. And so we lose a lot because of that. Answer number 3. There's a lot of pussies in our movement. There's a lot of guys that wouldn't have stood there at UNT. A lot of guys that wouldn't even gone there because Antifa's showing up. I'm not even going to go. I can't tell you how many grown men called me and said, "Oh my God, you be careful. Jeff, aren't you worried?" I'm like, dude, like, where did you grow up? Did you not scrap every Saturday night? What are you talking about? It ain't that bad. What am I going to do? Get punched? Whatever. These people are so afraid. Now, there's some rationally grounded fear here. Okay? I've insulted all these guys, so now let me kind of take up for them. The gay mafia is the most vicious lobby group in America. They know absolutely no limits. They will come for your children. They will go after your grandmother. They'll get your grandmother fired from her job, sacking groceries. Okay? They are vicious. They have no limits whatsoever. And a lot of politicians really fear this. The intimidation tactics that they use are carefully crafted. If you don't believe that, ask yourself why those 3 senators voted for this recent Supreme Court justice. All right? The intimidation tactics, the racial intimidation tactics that they use are very effective against conservatives. So are the gay, this is what drives me crazy about Turning Point. Right? It's like they have been totally co-opted by this LGBT agenda. Right? And it's because they fear the criticism that they get, because they have a lot of women they depend on for their membership.
I got pulled out of a Turning Point line once for going up to ask Dan Crenshaw why he supported gay marriage.
Yes.
And they were screening questions, and they pulled me out of line. They said I couldn't ask it.
Couldn't ask it.
Yep.
Yeah, they're afraid of that. Answer number 4, another one we don't like to talk about. Gentlemen, women are the problem for conservative politics.
Where are they?
They aren't here. They aren't here, and they're never here.
No.
Except if you go to the Republican clubs, all the Republican clubs in your county, I'm going to guarantee you right now, are all women's clubs. Every last one of them.
Like there's a place like a group here called the Lubbock area.
Women's, yeah. Women are the swing vote for the Republican Party. And look at that chart. That ain't looking good. That gap's widening. So I keep asking when I speak at a lot of women's clubs, because all the clubs are women's clubs. Men are working, women are doing politics. Right? So I ask them, whose responsibility is it to get this female swing vote to vote conservative? They all look at me kind of funny. And I said, I'm pretty blunt with them. I say, well, look, I know you're women and you're not used to having responsibilities. You're responsible for bringing in the women vote. That's why we give you money for these women's clubs. That's what they're for. And they're not doing their job. They're failing. We're losing more and more women. If you look right now, there's been a massive swing of the Republican Party for these midterms right there coming up. Do you know what group swung Democrat instead of Republican? College-educated women. They swung +4 Democrat. Everybody else is +10 Republican, but not college-educated women. They're +4 Democrat. Okay? Women are the swing vote. They're the swing vote. And our Republican women are not doing their job. And everybody's afraid to talk about it because it's women. So I'll tell you to the degree that they don't want to talk about this.
So with that being said, like, when we get married one day, should we try to hold our wives and like our daughters accountable? Because right now we're seeing how women, especially college women, vote like that all the time.
If you want to ask me about marriage, man, that's a different question. Okay, you've got to take close stock of what the laws actually are around marriage. There's a reason why I'm running on a platform to reform family law. Okay, as a father, as a man, you have no rights to your children in this state. You ain't holding a woman accountable for nothing in your marriage, and she knows it. So you just got to understand what the laws empower women to do and what they don't. And let me tell you, this is what I was going to tell you, and understand how far this goes in the law. So I have a friend, David Lowe, who's running against Stephanie Click. Stephanie Click tried to kill my bill in the medical community. So I found somebody to run against her. And I worked in her district, and I'm going to get her ass out of office. Dustin Burrows is next. If he messes with me again, he'll be next. Dustin Burrows will be next. So Click is gone. She's gone. It looks like she's going to lose this election. And this is a big deal because this is a head of a major committee in the House, and she's not even going to make it to the primary because she killed my bill. And I documented everything so I can prove to her electorate that she did this. All right. She is constantly accusing David Lowe, which is her opponent, of wanting women to get the death penalty for abortions because he wants to abolish abortion as a criminal act. You want to give women the death penalty for abortions. And he came to me one day and he said, well, how do I respond to this? And I said, well, you just tell the truth. That's what I do. But the truth is very controversial. What happens to men in Texas when they kill babies in the womb? What happens when, you shoot a woman in the stomach to potentially kill the baby, but it doesn't kill the woman?
Well, isn't that considered a double homicide or something?
Well, no, we don't kill the woman. We just kill the baby.
That's still a homicide, isn't it?
Yeah, we give them the death penalty. There's 2 men who have been given the death penalty for that. Women do it every day. They just get the choice. They get to choose something that if you did it, you get the death penalty for.
Double standard.
I'm trying to show you that there's a maximal difference between how we hold people responsible in the law. The United States Sentencing Commission has studied patterns in criminal sentencing in all the states and the federal government since the 1960s. And it finds that the differences in sentencing for men and women for the same crimes under the same circumstances is vastly greater than racial differences. Vastly greater. Right? Women receive a minimum of a 30% sentencing discount for the same violent crime, including murder. And it goes further. Women's prisons in Texas are air-conditioned. Men's prisons are not. Rape is just considered part of the punishment. When a man goes to prison, we joke about it all the time. Yeah. We joke about it all the time. Very serious issue if it happens to a woman in a woman's prison, right? So I'm trying to tell you is you got to understand that your contributions as a father and a man are not valued by the law anymore. And that has had a long-term effect, and that gradually over time, society doesn't value your contributions either. And you have to be realistic about that. We should not act in the world as though the world is the way it ought to be. We should act in the world the way it is and try to make it the way it ought to be. And that's a hard lesson for a young man who wants to start a family. Very difficult. Okay, answer 5. You're really not going to like this. Normies hate this one. I've had people walk out on me at some of the women's groups. Okay. Are you sure? All right. You don't live in a democracy. You think you live in a democracy. You think you live in a republic.
I got myself all braced.
Well, I was always told this is a constitutional.
You were told that.
We can vote.
Yeah, look, it says that. Just like in the movie theater with Republic Pictures back in the 1940s. It's about as real as that. It's about as real as that. Right? What you live in is a carefully scripted theater of democracy to make you believe that your participation, right, will give you a voice. And if you believe that, even moderately so, you probably are not going to become violent. You're probably not going to be trouble for the establishment. You're probably not going to do all the stuff I do. You probably just wouldn't do it. I don't play electoral politics the way other people do. That's how I can get the governor to do what I need him to do. I can get Ken Paxton to do what I need him to do. I don't play their game. All right? I don't go try to convince people. I'm going to convince people you can't castrate little boys. I don't convince people that you can't castrate little boys. If they think that you can castrate little boys, I get them thrown out of office. I embarrass them. I break up their business dealings. I'll tell you a story. I went to a bank in my district. I had a recalcitrant representative who did not want to support. Not my representative. Recalcitrant representative. And this particular bank was a big donor to this gentleman. So I had a flyer printed up with the president of the bank superimposed on a rancher's body who was castrating a bull. I said, I won't mention his name, this is what this man does to little boys. So I went to talk to the bank president, and I said, hey, I'd like your help in trying to get him to push this law through. And he says, I don't want to talk about this controversial. And so I laid that out there. There's his picture, castrating a bull, saying he does this to little boys. And I said, go look out your window. Second floor. Goes out. And I have volunteers passing out that picture and maps to all the banks around him where we had worked out deals. If we sent them to open checking accounts there, they'd get bonuses, the $100 bonuses. And I said, you can make these people go away by making one phone call and tell this guy that he ought to support my bill. Ought to co-sponsor my bill. That's how politics is really played. All right? I don't ask, how do I persuade you? What, I'm going to persuade you that you can't give me a vaccine against my will? I'm not persuading you of that. I'm going to force you to do my will. All right? So this is the point at which, once you realize that you don't really live in it. In fact, I think constitutional conservatives are becoming part of the problem at this point. right? People will tell me all the time, like I show them the guy, I say, well, that's unconstitutional. I've been stopping from doing it and taking my kids, did it? I mean, when was the last time you remember the Constitution limiting the government in any way? Okay, I'm older than you guys, and I don't remember. So, I mean, we need to stop thinking that way. The government has become completely unmoored from the Constitution, right? That's a huge sea change in your thinking, and it has consequences we're going to talk about.
It's like 1984, like George Orwell's and like Brave New World.
It's getting that way, and I think Brave New World's the more accurate. But if I had to describe the way the government actually works, you have a bunch of agencies, technocrats, right, that run these agencies. And those agencies run as administrative courts, right? And they serve overlords or oligarchs. So it's really like a critarchy in service to an oligarchy. That's really what this government runs like. And if you understand that, you can actually manipulate it pretty well. Once you understand.
It's like we criticize Russia, but we're doing the same thing as Russia.
We're worse. We're far worse. I'm Orthodox, right? Remember, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Russia's an Orthodox country. I know a lot about Russia. Russian media interviewed me about my son. They're like, I thought Texas was in. They're like, Texas is religious. It's in the Bible Belt. How can this be happening to an Orthodox boy in Texas? Like, did not compute to me.
Did you have much support from the church?
Zero. So when I went to the Senate to testify, I was invited guest to testify. I got an hour to speak to the Senate. They had 17 pastors, and we had 0. My church at the time was a Greek Orthodox church.
No more.
The Greek Orthodox church essentially took the side of the rich liberal donors and effectively threw me out of the church. So I go to an Antiochian church now.
Yeah.
But so I didn't have anything from the church. Jack. So think about that.
Where do you live again?
Dallas. Flower Valley. Yeah.
Okay.
So remember, like, they got 17 pastors to show up to argue that we should chemically castrate kids. 0 of our guys showed up. So I went to Prestonwood Baptist Church. I went to other churches, big churches, and I talked to their boards and said, why didn't you show up? And they all say they're afraid to lose their tax-free status. They get involved in politics, they also take the tax-free status. So again, I just tell the truth. That's still the truth. I said, well, pay your damn taxes and preach the gospel. Pay the money. And they just look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what? Pay taxes? I'm like, dude, it's like a service business. Like, you're probably net 0 at the end of the day once you pay salaries. Like, you're not going to pay that many taxes. Just pay your taxes and then you can preach whatever you want. That's how cowardly they are. That's just how cowardly they are. Never occurred to them to pay the taxes. And then when I suggested it, just total freak out. But they can't say anything to me because, But, basically they just don't talk to me. I can't get return calls on. That's why you keep losing. You keep pretending you live in a government that doesn't exist. You need to seek the means of coercion in the government that actually exists. And this is true in my consulting practice. When I go to businesses, there's a nominal business, which is the business that's on paper, the one they report to the government. And then there's the way business really gets done. As a consultant, I have to deal with how shit really gets done, right? Okay. You just have to do that as well. So what this means is, since the government has become completely unmoored from the Constitution, that modern conservatism isn't about preserving anything. Like, what is there left to preserve? Dude, they're castrating little boys. Like, what is there left to freaking preserve at this point? Pedophilia has basically been legalized in California. The rape of little boys has half the jail sentence for the rape of a woman. Like, what are we preserving here? Nothing. There's nothing left. Rather, we must re-envision conservatism as a restorationist project. We want to go back to a former political order and restore it. And to do that, we're going to have to think very differently about politics. Let that sink in for a second. This is a cold civil war, and that should be your mentality going forward. what did Lincoln say about the actual Civil War? Well, he said, look, here's the deal. We've reached a point where we're diverging. Okay? Either the Union will become all slaveholders, or it will become no slaveholders. And he said, this divergence can be so big that a house divided against itself can't stand. The Union will collapse otherwise. It is going to go one way, or it's going to go the other. Right? That's how it's going to be. We're either going to go back to limited government and federalism, or we're going to go fully to communism. There's no middle ground. There's no mixed economy anymore. Those days are completely over. And I contend that the only possible peaceful way forward is to return to a radical conception of federalism as the founders understood it. And I believe that is possible by using the states, not the federal government. How do you win a Cold War? And remember, if you watch Highlander, there can only be one. Right? When we're done with this, there won't be a left in the United States anymore. There will be no loyal opposition of the left. They will not be allowed to exist. That's how it's going to have to be. The first thing is, recognize that compromise, consensus, and reasoned dialogue, which at this university they probably tell you all the time is the highest achievement of Western intellectual life. All of that will make you lose. For the left, the communists, for example, in the 1960s, during all the Cold War proxy wars, would call peace conferences all the time. Well, how come the communists are calling peace conferences all the time? They're the ones making all the wars, right? Because they use the peace conferences as a delay tactic to gain more time, to build more force. For the left, argumentation, reasoning, dialogue, these are all tools, right, to let them amass force somewhere else. They're just delay tactics for them. Much more important for us is information and intelligence gathering. We need to know what they're doing, how they do it. We have done no source and methods analysis of the left on our side. Right? I'll give you an example. The governor of Texas wants to landmine the southern border. Trump wants to build a wall. Okay, I'm good, man. I have a big build a wall shirt. I get punched for it sometimes. Build a wall. I like to go down to Deep Ellum, get into it. So, but would that matter? Would that stop it? Let's say we blocked it all off and nobody could get through. Let's say it works. Nobody can get through the wall and we landmine the border. Would it stop it? Some of you are a little ambivalent. You're not sure because it's a trick question. I want you to say no. Actually, all these people are coming in through legal ports of entry. They're not sneaking across the Rio Grande. Okay, here's how it works. The federal government refuses to build detention facilities for these people. So at every legal point of entry, there's a jail, basically. It's a nice jail, but it's a jail. And it holds 2,000 people. It's the same building, rebuilt over and over again. 2,000 people. The narco-traficantes send 2,000 volunteers across the normal port of entry. They cross the bridge, they talk to the immigration agent, and they apply for asylum. When they hit 2,000, when Mr. 2001 shows up, what do? They say, well, we're full. Here's a piece of paper, and it tells you to come to court on this date. Just come back a year from now to this court, and here, enter the United States, because I don't have any place to put you. Thank you for applying for asylum in the United States. That's how you get 100,000 people under the bridge in Harlingen. Okay? Not because they're sneaking across the border. They've weaponized the laws. Okay? So, I'm in the state, and I'm trying to give you examples of why this intelligence. So now I know how they're doing it. How many people do you think know that? Hardly anybody in our movement knows that. Right? How bizarre is that? That they don't understand the main mechanism by which these people are entering the country. So I'm thinking, as a state representative, what can I do at the state level to stop that? Because now I have the intelligence, I have the information, I know how they're doing it, right? I said, well, as soon as they hand them that piece of paper and they walk up the street, we should arrest them on state crimes. And we should have a judge ready to just immediately sentence them to 3 years in prison. Just immediately. For vagrancy or whatever. Doesn't matter what we get them on. Right? And then we build tent prisons the way Arizona did. Right? And if they help us build the wall, they can get early release in only 1 year, and we'll return them back to their country. Help us landmine the border so your compadres can't come over here. Or how about this? Help us build a giant detention center that holds 50,000 people, and we can donate that to the federal government.
That's a good idea, actually.
And we make them build. Well, did I come up with that because I'm a super genius? No. I actually studied what Mexico did. That's how all the infrastructure in southern Mexico was built. It was built by Guatemalan illegal immigrants. And they put them in chain gangs, and they got early release if they helped build roads and bridges. So I'm just copying that. But once I know how they're doing it, I can come up with an actual way that will work, for God's sakes. Not that stupid riverboat with the double machine guns that we, the governor's not even statutorily authorized to fire those machine guns. It's just bizarre. So we have to think, when we get this information, what are the political, social, technological, economic instruments of power? And we should think that way. What are the political instruments of power that we can deploy against the left, right? And just to reiterate, dialogue with the left is only a means for them to regroup and refund and come at you again. I don't need to talk to them. When I just got another call from Dallas Morning News, this particular investigative reporter wants to talk to me, and I keep telling him I don't talk to leftist news outlets. I just don't do it. I don't do it. I will fly up here at my own expense to talk to you, but I will not talk to a single son of a bitch at the New York Times. Most conservatives, unfortunately, in Texas, most elected conservatives are the opposite. They would never fly here to talk to you at their own expense. And they would love to kowtow to a New York Times reporter to get some press. We have to do the opposite, exact opposite of that. The means of coercion are all that matter. Politics in a Cold War environment, in a Cold Civil War environment, politics is not about persuading people. It's about forcing people to do your will. It's about achieving what I call the defeat phenomenon. And the Marine Corps defines that as defeat is when the enemy makes a conscious decision to do what you tell them to do. They just don't want to take the pain anymore.
So right? The art of war.
Yeah. Debate is not the way. Debate is no longer the way. Now, occasionally I will debate the left. I did a debate on gay marriage at UNT a long time ago. We couldn't find anybody to debate it. And I'll give you an example, encounter from that. I had someone's, the very first question, after I conclusively demonstrated that everybody was wrong, like they were all saying you're born gay. There's literally no scientific evidence anywhere that you're born gay at all. It doesn't exist. Billions of dollars, it's the Holy Grail. And they can't find any evidence of it at all. It's about as genetically determined as your food tastes are, and what you eat is completely in your control. Right? So I conclusively proved that. I even got one of the biologists that were up on the stage with me to basically admit this. Okay. So I just destroyed them on facts. But that doesn't matter to the left, right? I'm not there for the left either. I'm there for our guys. I'm there for our conservatives because I want them to feel like they're kicking ass. Anything that rallies our guys, that's good. Very first question, this crazy white girl stands up and says, "Don't you really just hate gays because you're racist?" And of course, that's totally incoherent. It's totally incoherent, right? So, when I respond to the left and these things, now what's the script I'm supposed to follow? What's the script? I have minority friends. I've advocated for minority issues, right? So I just looked at her and I said, look, I get it. I get where you're coming from. Like, there are people that you care about who were mistreated in the past. Right? And I understand. I understand that. I said, but I come from a line of people who are conquerors and builders. And I'm not ashamed of that. And I'm not going to apologize for that. But I understand where you're coming from. I feel bad too. And there was just 60 seconds of dead silence. A people of conquerors and builders. Like, completely blew them away. I'm supposed to apologize for being a conqueror? I'm not going to do that. So my best friend from Nigeria, his name is Mag. He's a champion wrestler. He kicks my ass in wrestling all the time. You know, that's how he thinks of his people. They're conquerors. They conquered that land. They bled for that land. They died for that land. Like, as an African, he just cannot understand this American way of thinking. So I got that actually from him. You know, like, we don't have to be ashamed of our pasts. All of us come from people who are pretty badass in one way or another. We don't have to feel bad about it. But, like, it just totally destroyed their... Because you've got to follow a script. And if you vary from the script, they can't even really call you a racist. They just don't know what to say. They don't know. So, you know, there's a whole rhetorical strategy around coercion instead of persuasion, is what I'm trying to get at. Coercion doesn't necessarily mean political coercion or economic coercion. It can also mean coercion using words. That conversation with me was not going to go the way she wanted it to go, so she just didn't want to do it anymore. What does it mean? I mean, I want to be specific about it, right? It means removing their ability to resist and using instruments of power, not argument. See how many times I have to say this? Because it's so ingrained in us. Like, you'll meet somebody and you'll want to argue with them. And instead of going, how can I make that son of a bitch do what I want him to do? How can your club make the university do what it needs to do? Rather than convincing them. Now, all of this was just to prepare you to hear my actual speech.
Ooh. I gotta go.
It's us or them.
Amen.
There's no middle ground. The only way forward is if we just accept California is going to be fruitcake crazy and Texas is not. We'll put you in the electric chair for abortion here, and in California, they'll elect you to be governor. We'll just have to accept they have different ways of life than us. And
Didn't we try this already?
we tried this, yeah. It was kind of like the original idea of America, right? We didn't expect that we would all have the same way of life. That implies that in Texas, at least, traditions have to be restored here, and a tradition of federalism at the federal level. And this is probably one of the more controversial aspects of all of this. The individual is not the lowest unit of society. Families are the lowest unit of society. And we need to stop this focus in conservatism on individualism. That's what gets used against us time and time again, right? The lowest unit in society is the family. The Enlightenment philosophers that you are studying in this university were all wrong. John Locke was wrong. Hobbes was wrong. Rousseau was wrong. They're all wrong. They're all wrong. Man never exists in a state of nature. Right? Rousseau sees man in a state of nature and he says he's essentially free. Okay? Hobbes sees man in a state of nature. He says, well, man is essentially at war with every other man. Okay? And Locke sees man as, well, he's free, but in the sense of he can make choices for himself. Right? Rousseau means he's materially the same as all other men. Right? And they all develop political theories from this imaginary condition of man in a state of nature. And I actually think you can classify every political theory in the modern world and trace it back to one of those three ideas. It's an excellent typology of political theories, right? They're all wrong. We never enter the world in a state of nature. We enter into the world in small communities called families. That's the starting point. Aristotle was right. Economics and social theory all begin with home economics and the governing of the family. Legislation should be power-based. It should not be principles-based. if you're a libertarian, I hate to break it to you, there is no libertarian path to a libertarian state. You will have to use state power to accomplish the establishment. Same for conservatives. There is no constitutional path to reestablish the Constitution. Did the founders use constitutional principles to win the Revolutionary War? Hell no. They stole all those British ships. John Paul Jones was infamous for that. I mean, he was crazy good at it, right? We broke every law and every moral principle of conservatism in order to win the war, and then you get your principles. So you get your principles after you win. Right? The Constitution's gone. You have to accept it. If you want to win it back, you have to use every means of power, including government power, that you would think is not conservative, and use it against your enemies. Let me give you an example. I really championed that UIL bill last legislative session, which said that homeschoolers could participate in UIL sports. Right? Why do I like that bill so much? Because it makes the public schools pay for our guys who are homeschooling. All of our guys are the ones who are homeschooling. Well, the left always makes us pay for their shit. Now the public schools got to pay for our guys. See what I mean? I want to use power against them, make them pay for it. And they don't count as students in the school either. The federal government doesn't give them matching funds. That shit comes straight out of their social budget. We're just raping them when we do that. That was an excellent use of political power. We need to do more of that. Power-based legislation, not principles-based. Anything that hurts the left should be fair game. And that includes using the IRS, all the stuff they do to us. Make them pay. Use wedge issues. The transgender issue is a wedge issue. 60% of them agree with us. How come we're not using that against their candidates? We never get wedge issues with them. We have tons of them now. So I've gone to South Carolina and Florida and talked to their legislatures, and I'm trying to create a contiguous abortion-free zone from Texas all the way up to South Carolina. And it has to be contiguous.
I think we tried that.
And then, yes. And what we're going to do is nullify abortion law first. And we're going to start making it normal for states to nullify laws. The Florida legislature and the South Carolina legislature are all on board. Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama kind of on board. Louisiana is balking. Okay. But that's the future. The future is small pockets of conservative states pushing back on the federal government, right? And you have that much coastline and that many ports that you can scare the shit out of them. Texas particularly, because we have no federal land here. Okay, all the so-called federal land here is leased from the state. We can revoke those leases anytime we want, right? We have to start pushing back in that way with force, not persuasion. And we need a policy of self-reliance in the states. Texas should cooperate with Florida, for example, to become totally self-reliant from the federal government. We should be able to provide our own energy. We should have our own power grid and maintain that. And before you can become a Texas, you can't just move from California and become a Texas citizen. You got to take an oath where you swear that you're against abortion, by the way. And if you're not willing to swear that, then you don't get to vote here. You're not a citizen. Okay? So we need to start doing this kind of stuff where we start separating ourselves from the other states in every way. So you're smiling over there because this is actual uses of power that we could actually do.
Oh, I love it. This is what I think that probably the first time that I ever met Chaz, I got into an argument with a guy who was saying, well, we have to follow the Constitution.
I know.
The Constitution has been
It's
dead.
It's dead. It's not only dead.
I've just very rarely heard anybody else
dead
say
and buried.
this.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example about countering leftist social policies. Like my proposal for the schools and the CRT, you hear all these people, I'm going to ban critical race theory. Yeah, well, I tried that with the Common Core laws. I worked very hard to get Common Core outlawed. It's taught in every classroom in the state of Texas, okay? That did not work. Turns out you can't ban ideas. I learned from my mistakes, okay? So you can't ban ideas. They can rename them, repackage them, stick them in a textbook. There's nothing you can do about it, right? What you need to do is get rid of the people who have the bad ideas. You got people teaching this critical race theory crap. I want to say on a majority vote in a school district, you can just vote a teacher out and she doesn't have a job anymore. And she loses her retirement. You can vote out a school principal, vote out a superintendent. You can't do that right now. So I want to democratize the schools because we have the advantage that the grassroots actually control all the votes. I want to democratize the schools. How about Austin? Let's revoke Austin City Charter.
Yeah.
And return them to the county. Break them up into 5 different cities. Separate the liberals into one enclave, and then put the DPS in there and arrest them all. That's perfectly within the power of the legislature to do. Perfectly within the power to do. That's what I mean by using political power and not persuasion. And the last thing I will tell you is that that's all that matters, social policies. All the free market stuff, none of that matters. Okay? If this goes, all the rest goes. All the rest goes. Free markets rest on an assumption about culture and stable contracts and all kinds of things that you don't think about. You can't have that's why you can't really have free markets in Ghana. The social structures in Ghana won't support free markets. Okay? That's why they really only appear in Western style governments and cultures. Places like Kenya have become westernized enough to have really effective markets, right? But not Ghana. Ghana has not done that. The French colonies didn't do that transformation, right? Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. And it's sad, but true. It's just the way it is. There's a great documentary you can watch, Empire of Sand, about a Chinese company that tried